Hello, welcome to Chile Talk. This is going to be the first in a series of short-ish videos, short to medium videos, about life in contemporary Chile. My name is, with quite a bit of history thrown in. My name is Neil Davidson. I am a writer. In particular, I'm a newspaper columnist here in Chile and have been for almost 20 years. And with me is Pete Leihy, who has, you've held some kind of academic position, haven't you, in Australia?
Various ones, yes.
Anyway, Pete is a keen amateur of Chilean history and has read a lot about the subject with beads of sweat from concentration standing on his brow. So he's going to guide us through the rough patches.
It's a white knuckle ride.
That's right. So our first video is called Curfew, the Weight of the Night, and it arose because I was very struck by the way that as soon as the coronavirus started to spread in Chile, one of the very first things the government did was to introduce a nighttime curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m, which you can see the rationale for a curfew. You know, there's a lot of deprivation already. There's clearly going much more because of the virus. People can't work, there's a quarantine, a lockdown, and you can see that they're worried about crime, you know, the good folk like us, you know, being, you know, the mob descending upon us and stealing all our things, coming from my books and things behind me. But other countries have not seen fit to introduce a curfew. You know, Argentina is just as poor, they have no curfew, you know. So, you know, what is it about Chile? Because we'd only just come out of a series of curfews, hadn't we? Because of the protests that started last year. Well, perhaps you could just say a bit about the protests, Pete.
Yes, the protests from mid-October 2019 in Chile. General social unrest over inequality, political dysfunction as well. Ran all through the summer of 2019.
And also, it seemed to be something that nobody could quite put their finger on, a kind of general malaise, because they were triggered by something very small, weren't they?
Yes, a small rise, I believe that 4 US cents.
Right, three pence.
Yes, rise in the subway fare.
That's right.
Here in Santiago.
That's it.
And initially, high school students began to riot, and then.
But they started jumping the barriers. They started jumping the barriers, didn't they? And one thing led to another.
Yes, and a curfew was called into place eventually.
That's right.
A couple of days. And
that's right, and lasted some time. I forget how long now. It all seems like a quite remote past, you know.
Yes, right. Well, it ran all through the summer, all the way up until February. And February is the month of holidays in Chile.
That's right. So nobody was quite sure if the protests were winding down or if everybody had simply gone on holiday with the intention of starting up after the holidays. February in Chile is what the Ferragosto is in Italy or something, basically. Even people with quite slender means somehow managed to decamp to the seaside, you know, and be somewhere within sound of the sea for February. So we never did find out really if it was just a pause or if the thing had run out of steam, because there were concessions made, a constitutional convention to replace the dictatorship era.
A vote on whether to have
a constitutional convention. We're still living with the roughly modified constitution of Pinochet's years, aren't we?
Yes.
So anyway, so that brings us to the present. So we never found out if everybody was getting bored by that time or if it was just a pause, because along came the coronavirus.
Yes. And we went into lockdown.
In what date? Well, mid-March, anyway, wasn't it? We're a bit later than some other countries, because there were only localized quarantines for some time, for some weeks, and then it was spreading, and so it was extended to the whole of Greater Santiago and other parts of the country. but the curfew was introduced pretty early on.
Yes.
So, what is the history of curfews in Chile? I mean, why are Chileans so accepting? Because nobody protested about this. This is a country where people protest, but nobody protested against the curfew being implemented.
Yes, well, Chile often goes into curfew. It has a lot of natural disasters, for one thing. And when there's a natural disaster, often there is unrest associated
and looting, of course, is a big thing.
Looting and general uncertainty, and there is a tradition to have a curfew, prevent people from going out during the night. And all throughout Chile's history as a republic and prior to becoming a republic in the colonial period, there have been curfews at various points in time.
Right. In fact, I remember a writer here called Roberto Merino, a very good writer who writes a lot about Santiago and knows his history. I asked him about the subject, and he produced a book that he and only he owns, I think, which is a collection of articles from newspapers and periodicals from 1817. And this is to show, just how dangerous life here was seen as being. The central government, made it obligatory for every house in Santiago, every lodging, to light an outside lamp from 6:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. in winter. I think it was 8 p.m. till midnight in summer. To light the streets, basically, and the penalty for failing to do this was, for the los pudientes, for the wealthy, was 4 pesos, which was actually 4 pounds of silver, wasn't it, Pete?
It ought to have been, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, quite a lot of money. For the poor, it's specifically distinguishing, the rich and the poor. For the poor, it was 8 days in prison. Second offence, the penalties were doubled. Third offence, it goes off the charts. The government was free to decide on what penalty to impose. So pretty draconian penalties for what would seem a rather slight offence of forgetting to light your outside lamp at night. To get an idea of why this was felt to be necessary, I mean, a writer called Benjamin Vicuña Mackenna, a historian, when was he writing, Pete?
Throughout the latter half of the 19th century.
That's right, and he was a very prolific historian, a kind of Macaulay type historian of Chile.
He wrote a lot of the myths, created a sort of mythology of Chile.
That's right, very influential. He also he even wrote some works in English. He lived in England and the States, and he was also even a fireman. A well-rounded man and a politician. He was the mayor of Santiago, and he beautified the city, which was later de-beautified somewhat. We'll talk about that on a future show. And Vicuña Mackenna, writing about the 18th century, talked about Santiago as a city that was lugubrious, melancholy, full of apprehension. He said there was so much drunkenness that he thought there could be nothing like it in any other part of not just the planet, the universe, he said. And that once curfew started, municipal carts would go around, planks laid on just wheels, big sort of surfaces on wheels, pulled by horses or oxen, would go around and collect the cuerpos inanimados of the drunks. Now, I thought by cuerpos inanimados, inanimate bodies, I thought he meant they were just unconscious. But it said, no, they took them to the morgue. These were the dead drunks, And
had no soul, literally.
That's right. That's right.
Anymore.
Exactly. So perhaps they were still alive, but they just lost their souls.
Yes.
But no, there was a sufficient number of actually people who died of drink each night for a special cart to be required to take them to the morgue. And so perhaps we're beginning to see why a curfew might have been needed here, Pete.
Yes. I think
there was a phrase you told me about, the weight of the night, el peso de la noche.
Yes, the weight of the night is a phrase used in passing, as far as we know, by an early Chilean Republican statesman, Diego Portales, who was the head of the conservative faction in the 1820s, 1830s. He was actually assassinated effectively, executed extrajudiciously. Judicially, yes, I have to get that correct. And he described the weight of the night as being the responsibility of the few educated people in the new republic to be watchful of the masses. And at the time there was scarcely 1 million people when Chile became a republic, and it grew reasonably rapidly from there, but very conscious of a mass of ignorance and very little personnel, very few technocrats to run the place.
Got it. So you had this small circle of light, which was the enlightened people, and then you had this great mass of ignorance and squalor.
Yes, and Chilean, insofar as there were early Chilean Republican intellectuals, they were very mindful of Chile's not having been through the Enlightenment. In the Spanish Empire, reading was suppressed in the general population, except for the priesthood and some.
It was considered to be sort of bad for the populace.
There was no printing in Chile in the colonial period.
Of course, that's right. Dr. Johnson talked about this in England in the 18th century. That there was great alarm because some industrialists or large landowners had started introducing schools for their, teaching the peasants to read, and the kind of the powers that be were rather worried, thinking that once these workers learnt to read, they would probably become idle, and dissatisfied. And Dr. Johnson said, all our great industrialists know how to read and write, and they're the most enterprising and energetic body of men you could hope to find. So he, and probably on balance, Johnson was right, and it was probably desirable for the populace to learn to read and write.
Well, I think in the 18th century, the Spanish Empire was just holding on, really.
But the Spanish maintained this attitude for longer as well, of considering it rather undesirable for the populace to.
Yes, particularly during the 18th century, with the suppression of the Jesuits, for example.
Of course, who were great beacons of learning in the areas. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they definitely rolled back the light.
Yes.
And back in came the darkness.
Yes, the Chilean flag, of course, has the morning star in a corner of it.
That's right.
Which is a symbol of a light that is supposed to.
That's right. It's the lone star. It's called La Estrella Solitaria, which I suppose is the same as the Texas Lone Star. And I'm not quite sure.
It's older than the Texas flag. Chileans will always point that out to you.
Okay, and why is it? Do you know why it's a lone star? Is it a specific star, or just the idea of?
Well, actually, there's a popular writer who's become very successful in Chile, doing the sort of secret history of Chile. It's called. I think every country has it, and of course, Chile had to get around to it eventually. It's a style of writing that actually Vicuña Maquena began, and his name is Jorge Paradit, and he writes of the Masonic symbolism of the star, because of course the early conquistadores, the libertadores,
never confuse them again, Pete.
Those who freed the different South American states were organised in Masonic lodges of various kinds, and certainly the O'Higginsian faction.
O'Higgins being the great liberator, the most famous liberator of Chile.
One of them. Were
the most particularly Chilean one, anyway.
Yes.
Despite his surname.
Yes. He was very Chilean. Although the Carreras were also very Chilean. He certainly prized the idea of bringing enlightenment, while of course at the same time being a staunch advocate of discipline and control over the Chileans as well.
Okay. So how about the star? Sorry. What has?
So the star, represents enlightenment.
Okay, it's not a particular star that we can look for in the night sky.
Well, it's the morning star. It's Venus.
It's actually Venus. It's not a star at all.
Yes, which is ultimately considered a satanic symbol according to the interpretation of Jorge Barriga.
Okay, I think now we're going to get into deep waters. It's going to take us a very long way from Curfew. So perhaps I can just wrap up that I did actually, while borrowing this book from this writer I mentioned, Roberto Merino, I asked him if he had a theory as to why Chileans were so accepting of curfew, and he just said, we've had them for so long that possibly we just find them comforting.
Yes, and they can be very useful. Coronavirus, for example, provides a certain level of security during the night.
So there we are, Chilean comfort. Okay, thank you for watching this first episode, or first part of the series of Chile Talk, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.